The Rule 5 protection deadline has come and gone. Jeff and I are still here. Nobody added us to any 40-man rosters, but we're still here. We're going to tell you who's not here for the Guardians anymore, who's still here, and all the surprises that came on Rule 5 Protection Day.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show today. Thank you for coming for some shocking day of moves around the Cleveland Guardians. But first, you can start the season with the big return at FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started.
It was kind of a shocking day. The Guardians have added 4 players to the 40-man roster. 3 are gone. They had 1 open spot, so we'll kind of go through those additions. We'll talk about who's gone. Stephen Vogt won Manager of the Year. That's about all we're going to dedicate to that because
again, manager who we are shocked. Team
actually
played as well
good.
As he did. Yeah,
we'll talk about it towards the end. And the Guardians also have a new front office member. We'll tell you about who he is and that interesting situation as well. So lots of things to cover. Let's get started, Jeff. We got intros. I'm Justin. I'm Jeff. You're Justin. We crossed paths at Guardians and / Indians Baseball Insider. You did the draft. I did prospects, and we both kind of started in 2007, and here we are today.
We both speak real good.
Sometimes we do. I got to admit, so this is not a humble brag. I'm not trying to, break or tear my shoulder, pat myself on the back, but I will say most year, and you can, if you're an everyday or you listen to yesterday's show, you can already tell how we were wrong. I do feel like this is the first time for me in a couple of years where I did not have a feel for what they were going to do as far as the 40-man roster, or I thought I had a feel, obviously, and didn't. But I can predict how they're gonna do this, and we did say Aleman, that was an obvious one. We both did say Nikhazy or Webb, one of the two. We weren't sure which one, but it was Nikhazy. Obviously, the left field ones were Nick Enright and Petey Halpin. I got to admit, I didn't see those coming, and that's what we're going to talk through right now because we talked about Aleman yesterday. We talked about Nikhazy. That brings them a little bit of depth, but
and Webb was, we thought, you and I both kind of had Webb higher. It's there's more to it than this, but I did mention on yesterday's show, go back and listen, that there's sometimes a weird degree of where you were taken or how much you were paid. And in fairness, if you go back, Nikhazy and Halpin were 2 guys they paid a lot. I mean, they paid Halpin like a mid-second rounder, and Nikhazy was a second rounder. Those are 2 second rounders they added to the roster in a lot of ways.
There is that aspect to it. Let's start with Nick Enright before we get to Petey Halpin. Nikhazy, I don't think we need to spend time on Nikhazy. Let's just say
the opposite of the big the big money spending type.
Yeah. Real quickly, not to gloss over Nikhazy, but he did make changes to his delivery this year.
Yes.
When he came out of college, he was that high over the top delivery guy, and his
he was resistant to change.
It took him a while for the Guardians to convince him to make some changes to his delivery. So he went to more of a wide 3/4 arm slot. He kind of had to not scrap the curveball, but he had to lessen his reliance on the curveball. And now it's more fastball, sinker, slider change. It's more of a traditional approach, and he still has control issues. And I still think the best route for him is the bullpen, but we'll see how he does in year 2 with these changes. Maybe he takes some steps forward. It takes some time to unlearn old habits and mechanics and takes some time to learn the new ones. So maybe year 2 of those changes, he'll cut down on some control issues because he still walks some dudes this year. But the Nick Enright thing. So great story. You and I have talked about Nick Enright on this podcast in the past. He was taken by the Marlins in 2022 in the Rule 5 draft, which neither of us were surprised by. We thought if they didn't protect him in 2022, he'd be taken.
We liked him better than Kevin Kelly, who's gone on to have a really good career at the time. You and I were both higher on Enright than Kelly in that class.
Agreed. I definitely would have. I definitely had Enright ranked higher on probability or guys I would add over Kevin Kelly. And I liked Kevin Kelly quite a fair bit that year. So just the first thing on Enright is he's going to be 28 next year. He's going to be 28, I believe, in January. Yeah, January he'll be 28 years old. Very, very surprising to add someone, and he missed most of the year with a right shoulder strain. He pitched well in April, didn't come back until the end of August. And if you'd have to know the story, he had Hodgkin's lymphoma when he was taken by the Marlins in 2022, and that obviously impeded his ability to make the 40-man roster there as he was fighting cancer. He beat it, and then he did get to pitch in the minors for the Marlins, but on a rehab assignment, and then they chose to let him come back to Cleveland. So first of all, he's a 20th round pick. The Guardians love their 20th round or late round relievers. But just kudos for him. $75,000 signing bonus. He's 28. He's battled cancer. He's been selected in the Rule 5 before. This is the definition of perseverance. So you gotta feel good. You feel good for a guy like Enright to be in this position. And
I would argue if he was healthy this year, he would already be in this position too.
That's fair. No, I agree. I think if he had not had the shoulder strain, he definitely would have made his debut this year along with Franco Aleman. Those guys both would have been up this year at different points had they been healthy. So maybe in a way this is just delayed. I told someone earlier today, I didn't see a pathway for him here because, again, he's going to be 28. I just felt like maybe another organization again was his best chance. So I didn't see them opening a roster spot for him. And I just, they were already going to add Aleman. What was the point of adding him too?
Option situation. I didn't even think about that.
He's got all three. Yeah. He hasn't been optioned, so he's got all three.
I guess, yeah.
And I think that plays into this, number one, because
Strzelecki doesn't have those.
He didn't have them. Gillespie did, but Gillespie was roster fodder. Yeah. I think there's another interesting piece here with Enright that I'll get into because I'm hogging the mic here, but Enright's got good carry on his fastball. Like he's 92, 94. He can hit 95. It's got they love that extension. He gets extension on it. It plays above the velocity. He's got, he used to have a really big curveball, but he's thrown the slider more in recent years. He does have a changeup. So he's kind of a 4-pitch reliever that might be able to give you multiple innings. He's a big guy, 6'3", 205.
Make him a starter. That's what everyone says.
Could be. I mean, he's got 4 pitches, but he's got an interesting arsenal, and I don't mind the ad for sure. I don't mind them adding him. I'm just kind of surprised they did it, and I think he deserves it. And if he stays healthy, he can be a contributing member of the bullpen, especially as an up and down guy this year.
Yeah, I also think, again, for me, when we were sitting there, when they added Pedro Avila, no, I said it wrong. Avila. There was some thought of well, they got Enright and Aleman, and we knew Walters was coming. Then Enright and Aleman got hurt, and I do think if he had been healthy, he would have been up. He is someone who has been well thought of. We have heard good things about throughout, and part of me wonders. Hopefully, I don't steal your momentum here, but it's could this be precursor to a relief trade that they need some depth here? That they think that that the one area that they have some depth to trade from is, a Gaddis, is a Heron. Again, I don't think it's Clase, and I don't think it's Cade Smith. I think those two you put in the untouchable tier. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. And you move on, but if they like Sabrowski, maybe they feel like, and I think Heron's gonna be hard to move with the Henches situation, but you're also getting Trevor Steffen back, and yeah, this could be about having someone for up and down, absolutely. And it could be for rewarding someone who's been, an organizational soldier, but has always had the potential to be more. And it just comes down to health. I think in some respects it's a smart ad. He looked awesome at the start of the year.
He did.
Relievers are what teams jump on. Relievers are what go. A reliever who has been selected before is also a common thing that gets taken. And a guy, if you're a team that needs relief help, he's actually a pretty good gamble based on the limited sample and what he's shown in the past. So I think, you and I did debate him off air. We did talk about him a bit, and we're he's not necessarily the highest value player because we don't know what's there. It's not to say he can't be a part of this bullpen for, a decade. There's potential for that. But I think it is more we kind of glossed over him a little bit because he's not the highest necessarily ceiling guy, but he, in some respects, is exactly what gets taken. And there's a logic in protecting a player who could be a long-time contributor, especially if you are going to trade from bullpen depth.
Yeah, I mean, I think we did gloss over him because of the age and the health history, but the performance is there. And like you said, minor league guys get taken all the time in the bullpen because of he's old enough to do it. He's had the past performance. It's just been about health, and he would have been a perfect fit for a Rule 5 pick for sure. And you went exactly where I thought I was going to go to was the trade thing. I think adding Enright gives you a little bit of cover on the soft side of the bullpen to make some trades. You still have Nick Sandlin. You still have Avila. You're getting Stefan back. You have Walters in an expanded role this year. You got Clase and Cade, Sobrowski, Herron, Gaddis. They do have depth to trade from. I'm not saying it's a precursor, but I do think it gives them some added
makes it easier
coverage to explore the option of doing it and see what they can do. And you do need an up and down guy. Like this year, they didn't have a lot of up and down relief options. Look what happened. They added Connor Gillespie. Peter Strzelecki was a guy they added late out of camp. They did not have a lot of up and down relief options this year to help them because of all the relief injuries. So the injuries too, what they went through last year, I think this also is part of them trying to cover their bases with relief options, because one thing you and I are concerned about, and I'm sure they're concerned about as well, is there's going to be some hangover in this bullpen from the use last year. Cade Smith and Herron and Gaddis, those guys all worked the most they've ever worked in their careers at a high intensity and deep into October. So there's some concern about bullpen hangover, and maybe Enright gives them some coverage for that. But the other piece of it too, which we'll get into in the next segment about Petey Halpin, is part of who you protect from the Rule 5 draft is having a feel for what other teams might value from your roster and who might get selected. So 100%. I think you're right. Enright represents somebody that absolutely would have been selected. So that was the right call on their part to protect him, because they had the feel that was going to happen. The Petey Halpin thing, to me, is a little more confusing in terms of, do you really have a feel for this guy being selected somewhere else? So we're going to talk about that next. We'll talk about George Valera, who's now moving on from the Guardians as well. That was part of the surprise of the Guardians' moves on Rule 5 Protection Day. So we've still got a lot to cover. Stick with us.
Well, you can't bet on the Cavs going 82-0. You could blame me for tuning into that game, I guess, today. But, look, I still think that was a great performance by a team down a lot of guys. I would still say, maybe keep your eye on the Cavs. See if you can get maybe some end of the season stuff right. It was around this time a year ago I recommended Edmonton as a bet, and one of our listeners nearly made a lot of money if they could have just pulled it off in Game 7. But I'll tell you right now to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need right in the same place you place your bets. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out your stats, you can view play-by-play, and so much more on that same place where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
So the Guardians added Petey Halpin to the 40-man roster too, and we talked about him yesterday a little bit, I think, at least off air, if we didn't talk about him on air. This one's a little more confusing to me, and I know you mentioned the bonus factor here. He got paid a lot of money in the draft, and maybe
they saved that money.
That was
that was Carson Tucker. That's why they took Carson Tucker, was to pay Petey Halpin.
Yeah. So they're protecting their bonus investment.
Yeah,
I suppose.
They after Carson Tucker just didn't want to play baseball anymore, they needed to make sure they get some return on that investment.
I guess so. Yeah, Logan Allen's not doing it for it. I mean, Cade Smith is still saving their 2020 class, and
Tanner Burns was under slot. Logan Allen might have even been under slot. All that money was for Halpin.
I thought Logan Allen came in at or close to it.
He might have been at or close to it, but Petey Halpin and Milan, was that the Milan Tolentino draft?
It sure was, yeah.
Yeah, those two guys were massively. That's where all their savings went, was Tolentino and Halpin.
High school. What did we just talk about the other day? High school hitters, right? They've done a horrible job with high school hitters.
They've really only done well with college talent.
They really have, which isn't a surprise either, because there's more predictability in that. Yes, and there's more data. We've talked about that.
Yeah,
the Halpin thing. You made some better points than I did to see this. I've seen Halpin a ton. I saw him in Lake County. I saw him in Akron. He's 22 and he repeated AA. And
hey, Will Benson repeated. levels, and
that's true.
Yeah,
there was more upside though. Well, I guess there's a lot of upside
more
with Petey Halpin.
I don't know. Will Benson's natural tools to me did make him higher.
Halpin's a quality defender in the outfield. Like he can play center. He's got enough arm for right. He's got legitimate speed on the bases to be a 15-20 steal guy. I just don't know if he's going to hit enough. And again, I'm just thinking out loud, like part of the Rule 5 draft is protecting guys you feel like you have a feel. They must have had a feel that other teams would have selected him, which is surprising to me because, again, he repeated Double-A last year. He just hasn't hit a ton in the minors. He's gone through multiple swing changes. He does have some swing and miss to his game. He'll be 23 in May, and he hasn't been at AAA yet. I'm just really curious to see what their evaluation was in terms of why they felt like they had to protect him, and if they really had feelers that someone would have taken him in the Rule 5 draft.
So I get why they did this. Petey Halpin wasn't necessarily he's not a top 30 prospect for me, but I understand the logic of this, which everyone, I know you're like, wait, what? You're not a big fan. Just to give a little more context, he didn't play after somewhere in August when he hurt his wrist, I want to say. But he started the year super hot and then cooled off, and it was essentially a league average player in Double-A, repeating the level. He does walk a bit. He strikes out more than you'd like for a guy with his power. He did hit more home runs this year, much higher rate. I know some people were very excited about the power. He's kind of a poor man's 3 outcome player. Like there's the walk rate, there's the K rate, but there's not the power. It's more of like
he's got speed and defense.
He's speed and defense. But and that's why I think I'm cutting around the corners here when I should just be diving in. The reason he was put here is, again, if you listen to yesterday's show, I used to every year at IBI write the write-up, right? I did the Rule 5 draft. I did all of the research. I talked about what the trends are, what teams select, and teams do go, it's reliever, and then it's up the middle, utility type, and then it's outfield, 4th outfielder. And that's Petey Halpin. And Halpin's mix of being able to play all 3 spots and his speed on the base pass makes him a potential selection. There is also basically a world where he becomes current Miles Straw with, more Ks, more walks, a little less power, probably not the same level of defense at peak. There's a world where maybe he becomes
not really Miles Straw then.
No, I know, but you know what I mean? Like plus almost all of his value coming from defense. I don't see a world where he is a league average major league player because he's barely a league average guy in Double-A while repeating the level. And we know like guys who repeat the level almost always do significantly better. That's a big negative. There's a world where you're hoping that he is what they thought Miles Straw would be, which is like a guy with like about 90 WRC, like 10% below league average with stellar defense. Kind of like Andres Jimenez, right? Like that's what we've seen the past few years. Maybe that's what they hoped. I think it's just a case of they want to get a few more looks at him. He is a young kid. He did miss time. That 2020 class, everyone's kind of, behind. They've all had some developmental issues for that general class. But with him, there's some tools and guys with speed, defense, and the ability to play 3 spots to get selected. So I think this isn't necessarily, I wouldn't go out there and be like, oh, Petey Halpin, top 30 prospect, top 20 prospect. I think this is more like we want to get a longer look, and there's a decent chance he'd get selected just based on speed, defense, and arm.
Do you really feel like, I guess it's easier to hide him because you're not going to play him that much and you're only asking for a limited role. Do you really see him as a guy that was going to make it through the entire season on someone's 26-man roster, though?
I think they don't want to get burned.
He'd have to skip AAA, and we've seen that the gap between AAA and the majors has grown. Some
teams still skip that. Like there are teams that still skip AAA. Like we have.
I'm just trying to think of a scenario where a team takes him and he literally sticks all season. Because at the end of that, that's what this is about. When you're trying to talk about,
there's always a chance as a backup, though. Like I just think that you always have when you
are. He doesn't play against lefties. I mean, he would have to be exposed. He would be exposed against lefties.
I think there's a pathway. It's like he's just got to stay on the roster. He doesn't have to play. He's just got to stay on the roster for so many days.
I just have a hard time believing that he would
they had to pay him a lot of. Here's the other component to this. They had to pay him a lot of money, and the fact they had to pay him a lot of money means there's a lot of teams who liked him. Teams often will circle back to a guy they like, and we've seen Cleveland do this. Circle back and get a guy later. Like they might have felt like there's a team out there that was going to circle back and get him. That big bonus, while not indicative of how he's performed so far, is indicative of demand.
Yeah.
So there was a demand. I mean, I'll be honest. You can go back and find my writing. He did not make my top 50 players in that class. He was close, and I said that I thought the gap between him and Pete Crow Armstrong was smaller than most people thought. If you look at PCA, like PCA is a similar player right now. If we're very honest, like Cubs fans won't love that, but it's like, I don't know. PCA looks like a 80 to 90, WRC plus with, he's probably more of a 70 in center, where I think Halpin is probably more of a 60 in center field. But best outcome is again probably an 80 to 90 bad. WRC, it's like being 10 to 20% below league average. And the problem was Miles Straw was when they signed him in that contract extension, they thought he was going to be that. Instead, he ended up being 40 to 60. So it's a big difference. We know they value speed and defense up the middle. And again, I think this is every bit as much of they want to just get a longer look. They don't want to have, even though Benson and Jones regressed horribly this year, I don't think this isn't necessarily reactionary in that way, but I think they kind of had this opportunity and they're like, why not see longer? I know we'll run to break, but it's like Valera isn't that interesting. Valera is more name value than player value. And like the fact that he didn't get any looks this year, I brought up multiple times, was very telling. And he hasn't really progressed in 3 years. He is the same hitter he was 3 years ago. He has had almost no progression as a hitter. All the same issues, all the same. There's not, which is partially what happens when a dude has only played in 89 games once in his minor league career. But we'll get more into Valera after our second little break here.
If you want to look at one thing real quick for Petey Halpin, that's a good data point to think about going forward. Is this year he hit more fly balls than ground balls for the first time in his career, significantly more. 31% ground ball rate, 42% fly ball rate. That's a significant change for him, which was part of his swing changes. And his pull rate was a 41%, which was by far the highest of his career so far. So they feel like there's some untapped power there.
A big jump in line drive, because you really can't look at his 2021 data.
He's getting more to pull side power. He's got to figure out a way to be more impactful on the bases. 12 of 19 on the bases. The defense is there. There is some chase issues, but the batted ball. Maybe he's like Jose Siri. Maybe there's a chance he's like Jose Siri.
Less power version, maybe. Yeah.
I mean, Siri had great power. He just can't get to it because he chases everything. I don't know if Halpin's that bad, but maybe that's a similar. Halpin walks a little bit more, so maybe that's a poor comparison. But a guy who has some underlying power and again speed and defense it is valuable. I agree. Again, there's such a big gap between AAA and the majors that skipping AA to the majors in this draft, Rule 5 draft, to me just seems very unlikely. But you're right. There is demand there. Teams circle back, and I guess they felt like it was better to take the risk and open the spot now. And one of those guys that was also paid a lot of money was George Valera. We got to talk about his exit from Cleveland when we come back. Another move that we could have seen coming, but not in this way, at least to me. I'm not surprised that George Valera is gone. I said last offseason he's going to be traded. If you go back and listen to last year, I said last year he'd be traded last offseason. They didn't do that. I'm a little more surprised they moved on from him. And then, by the way, they DFA'd him to open up these roster spots if you're not really paying attention. And Connor Gillespie and Peter Strzelecki were the other two, but we talked about them yesterday as being roster fodder, which Jeff will cover more roster fodder before we get out of here. I'm a little more surprised at the timing of this because he got the extra option. Yeah. So they had one more year to play with. Bet. Yeah. And he wasn't going to be healthy coming into the year anyway, but they got an extra option on him. So that kind of surprised me. But I mean, he had no trade value. I don't know because he's hurt and he just, like you said, he hasn't progressed in 3 years. Availability is the best ability there is, and he hasn't had that in a long time. And I think if we go back and look at what we wrote about him, maybe not you, and others, but for the most part, if you go back and look at the scouting reports, I think if you looked at it, you would notice some flaws that we just didn't see, which is the swing. And you said this ad nauseum. Everybody was talking about George Valera, and now he has this great picturesque swing. It's an aesthetic. It's fashion over function. The swing. He's got holes at the top of the zone.
Yeah, there's holes in that swing. There has been for years, and people have been ignoring that. People got mad at me when I pointed out there's holes in his swing.
Yeah, I do think for the most part it was the injuries. I think that really.
Well, that's why you can't progress
here. Right. I mean, I think if he had been healthy a lot longer, he'd already been up at this point. He wouldn't have been down to his needing a fourth option year. My guess is, though, they will trade him. Now they've DFA'd him. I'm sure there's some team that will make a trade for him because he's a former top prospect. And I'm not expecting Cleveland to get a lot back, but it'll be a trade for, I don't know, low level depth or
I'm betting it's money. A player to.
Yeah.
They're going in for Suzuki.
David Fry.
They're going to get more.
Fry part 2.
Yeah, it's going to be a player to be named later. So then they can get someone after the
protection deadline.
Yeah,
which would happen to David Fry. They waited until they thought that David Fry would get taken to Rule 5, and he didn't, and they got him after. So, hey, that trade worked out for them. I know Valera was a bigger prospect than J.C. Mejia, but Cleveland has a way of making these trades work sometimes. But
I would argue J.C. Mejia had much more value at that point in time than George Valera has now.
Yeah, it is a bummer for Valera. I mean, nice kid. Always rooting for him.
In his 6 minor league seasons, what is your guess on how many total games he played?
6 minor league seasons.
Don't look it up. If you're listening, type below your guess. Make it a comment.
Total games played?
Total games played. You're talking about, what, on average, about 120 games a year for a lot of guys. So
I'm going to say less than 300.
It's actually better than that. It's 445.
Oh, wow.
Because he did have 1 year at 132. And then
that was the year he got out of the 40-man roster. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 2022. And then it was 86, 79, 52. Like you can see that's why he hasn't progressed. And you go and you look through the data. This year, everyone talked about like the breakout he was having before he had the health issue. Still a 789 OPS playing in an incredibly hitter-friendly park. It was not good production in a hitter-friendly park.
Didn't hit lefties.
Yeah, he's a platoon guy who's, it might be more left field than right field. Like he doesn't move particularly well. When I watched him, it was not a ton, so I could be wrong. But like, he's going to be an average
fielder.
Yeah, he's going to be like a 50 defender who can't hit lefties, who can't stay healthy, who has holes in his swing, who can't make contact, who can occasionally hit one far. Like Esteban Florial is a better prospect a year ago than George Valera is now.
Maybe.
It's not to bury the kid, but he just got so overhyped. And that great year of his was still an 816 OPS. Like he's never, in 86 games in 2021, he had a great year. And then after that, they were all mediocre years. He was also, we were so focused on the tools at points, we just ignored the production being not stellar for a guy who was stellar. Like it was fine, but it wasn't. You expect a guy who people at point were comparing to Manny Ramirez to have Manny Ramirez numbers. A guy that people were arguing when you and I said, no, Bo Naylor is the top hitting prospect in this system. And yeah, Naylor's had his struggles, but he's been a big leaguer. People were saying no, it's Valera by a mile. It's like,
I mean, the reason Bo Naylor is a big leaguer and Valera is not right now is because of health,
defense and health. But I don't know, like we kind of with Valera, the hype always overmatched the production and the performance.
Yeah. I mean, if he had never gotten hurt, if he had been on the field, I think for sure he might have had a better chance to progress. And like you said, they passing him up this year for opportunities was pretty telling. The timing's just interesting because he had the extra option. But
yeah, that's the only thing that made me too. Like the extra option here, I thought, because the same thing I just said about everything I said about Petey Halpin, one could say about Valera, right? Like, hey, it's an opportunity to see one more year, see what you got. Just a more.
Where was the playing time going to come from this year? Because you have Quan, you've got Will Brennan, which I've been on record as being a big Will Brennan guy, and it just hasn't worked out either. But they're going to move. They're going to play Noel. You've got Rodriguez, who you thought would be traded, and You still have Martinez and Freeman, and we got to get to roster fodder real quick too. But yeah, I'll be curious to see what they get back from. Hopefully, it's a player name later that surprises everybody. But it is a crazy fall, and we talked about the 2017 international class last week, and it was it Monday this week? I can't remember when we talked about it, but that was the Aaron Bracho, Brian Rocchio, George Valera class, and John Kenzie Noel, and now it's just basically Rocchio, and it's been, again, it was touted as one of the best international classes. It was supposed to be a franchise-changing international class for Cleveland. It was not. It's
and
not
you can find me talking about it that way on this very podcast before you came, but that's why you can't really until guys make it. It's the same thing like last year when we talked about if you're going to trade a player, you got to make sure you get a proven player because the
this is why we don't. This is why we don't really rank international prospects high. Everyone else is like, well, why aren't you ranking Welbin Francisca or this international player? Like it was Robert Arias or whatever. It was like, because it's a very unproven group and they love to bank on those hit tools that never materialize. And the data from that level is incredibly unreliable and you never know what's going to happen. So it's like, those guys rank so low for me until I see them at AA. It's just too much risk.
Agreed.
Real quickly, why don't you mention the roster fodder piece? Because before we get out of here, I want to talk about the new baseball guy in the front office.
Yes. So very quickly, there isn't a lot of roster fodder, if we're being honest. If I'm going through and looking at this team, the four guys who come to mind, Jonathan Rodriguez, again, I wonder if maybe he could be a trade candidate later on this offseason. Gabby Arias, I think, is a trade candidate. I don't think he's a guy you cut.
Surprised he didn't go today.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is a lot of teams are also trying to figure out their own space and their situation. So sometimes it's harder with that guy who's on the roster to make that move. But there's always more opportunities. But the other part is I'm just going to keep saying it. Schneemann and Freeman are not only do they kind of rhyme, they're essentially the same thing. So at some point, I feel like you don't need both. So I feel like one of them is likely the next one off, if barring a trade of Rodriguez or Arias, so I still think have opportunities. And hey, maybe we're missing on this. Maybe this whole thing with Valera is more a sign that hey, Rodriguez is going to get a legit chance next year. That Brennan maybe we still could. I mean,
Brennan's got a lot of chances.
I wouldn't be shocked if Brennan ended up roster fodder. I'm being honest. It wouldn't.
I could see that.
Me. So we'll have to see where it goes. It was a shocking day again, mostly for me with Valera because he did have an option, and I thought my logic for Halpin extends to Valera, and then Ryan Webb. I know people are going to ask. There's our everydayer, Zathurin. Sorry, probably butchered your name. But, he, and you confirm this too. It's like he's got a flat fastball. The fastball, his secondary pitches have to carry him, and that's always a dangerous proposition for any player.
I think he could get taken, though. He could get taken.
I think he could too, and most places are going to list him in the top 5 guys. I mean, there's just a chance. You know what? You can get by with a mid or below average fastball when you're a reliever, and he does miss bats. And I think there is a logical pathway.
And he's a lefty.
And a lefty reliever, that is the number one thing that gets selected in the draft.
Yep.
Even starters who've never relieved, taking them as a lefty reliever.
Trevor Steffen, always on a lefty, but yeah.
But he was a starter to a reliever. So my prediction now, since I got wrong in the trade today, you can call me out on that, is I predict that Webb will be taken in the Rule 5.
I can see that. I 100% agree. I do think Webb will get taken, but we were wrong about everything today. Well, we weren't wrong about everything. We were wrong about Halpin and Enright and Valera, but just things we didn't see coming. All right, real quickly. And as Jeff pointed out too before, that the importance of roster fodder too is just that you have to have guys that you're able to move on from without much consequence in order to add other players through a trade or free agent. Right now, they're a little bit short of that, but yeah, you have Freeman, you have Schneemann,
and we don't think there's anyone in the Rule 5. So maybe they'll lose someone.
I don't. Not the major league portion, yeah.
Are we hoping that someone gets selected? Maybe someone that's not Webb, who we're not as high on, just so we have something to talk about. But yeah, they're so packed. They're not. No one's they're not jumping in.
The last piece of news before we get out of here in this episode is that, according to Ken Rosenthal, the Guardians have hired Bobby. I think it's Bobby Kinney. I think that's how you say it. It's Kinne. 2018 grad of Vassar College in New York, has been with the Rays as they had multiple roles since 2018 with the Rays. Baseball operations intern, advanced scouting apprentice, advanced scouting and replay, major league operations coordinator, and most recently this year, the major league pitching strategist. Rosenthal has him as the director of baseball operations, which is not a position
they had previously
I've ever seen listed on the Guardians front office directory. It's president of baseball operations, Chris Antonetti. You've got GM.
There's VPs of it.
Yeah, you got AGM, all that kind of stuff. They are missing, obviously, a director of not amateur scouting director. What was Rob Cerfolio's official title? It was he was the farm director, but essentially he was the minor league. He was the farm director. I don't know if this guy is replacing Rob Cerfolio as the farm director, because James Harris takes care of some of that too, and I'm not sure how they're reassigning roles. But as far as I know, this is not a role that I've ever seen in the Guardians directory before, as director of baseball operations. So
it was not when I went and looked today. Yeah,
I'll be very curious to see whenever they do announce this what the explanation is for this. But I've seen a lot of people saying that coming from the Rays, he's one of the really smart guy, and big part of their pitching stuff down in Tampa Bay. So this is an interesting one.
Yeah, they're finally stealing some brain drain from somebody else.
Yeah, instead of going the other direction.
And last time I really can remember that is Valeka, and then before him was James Harris, you just mentioned.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see if they get more announcements out about that. Stephen Vogt wins Manager of the Year, as we said. Congratulations on, that. Yeah. I mean, that is impressive, I will say.
No, it's a nice win, and congratulate. As much as we joke, congratulations to him. I mean, he had a lot of doubters coming in, so.
For sure. So for a first-year manager to win, that's impressive. But at the same time,
sends his regards.
Yeah. At the same time, that also says, hey, we thought you were going to suck this year, and you didn't. Congratulations. So, or maybe there just were no expectations. So I don't know, but that's cool. Good for him. Guardians, they do hire well. I will say they do hire pretty well. So Vogt, they did a good job on Vogt. So maybe the Bobby Kinney thing will do really good.
I was joking with you that maybe it's a sign that they think that the pitching factory needs a little help.
It certainly could. We'll get into that at some point. Tomorrow today was supposed to be the free agency preview. Obviously, there was a lot of Rule 5 news to cover. So that took up today's show. We're going to do trade talk Thursday tomorrow. So give us some more trade ideas, whether it's a player, a certain team, coming from one team, coming away from the Guardians. We'll explore that tomorrow. Friday, we'll do a free agent preview. We'll talk about some free agents that we think make sense for the Guardians. Hint, it's not going to be a lot.
No, that's my ripped list.
Yeah, and then Monday, we'll do a position review. So let us know what position you want us to review next.
Yeah, because everyone loves a good position review. Want to thank you all for joining, rating, and reviewing. If this is your first episode of the week, because you're curious to hear about this, make sure to go back and listen to the other ones. We have more information on all these guys. We know it's the off season and there's a lot of things to do. We're still having fun. Have some fun with us. Join us. Engage. Thank you all to everyone who is. Thank you to DNLS. I got to look at your name for your kind thing today. And thank you to everyone, honestly, who's tuning in. We understand the off season. There's a lot of things to watch. We appreciate your eyes. Please leave a comment below. Hit that like button and go Guardians, go.